من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فاللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إلى علمنا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. We'll continue with reading from the book known as the Musannaf of Abu Bakr Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Shaybah Ibrahim ibn Uthman rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 235. The Musannaf, a book that covers the statements of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Atba' Tabi'een, and their understanding of the various masail that are in the ahadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, i.e., those narrations that reflect the view of the Sahaba and how they implemented the ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Naam. And so the chapter that we're in is part of the section Kitab al-Tahara, the section that deals with purification. And we're in the things that should be done during wudu, as well as the things that nullify one's wudu. And from the things that we notice is that there's a little bit of disjointedness or randomness in some of the chapter positions and some of the arrangement of the chapters. And this is because different manuscripts of this book have the chapters in different orders. Some of the different manuscripts of this book have some of the chapters in different orders. And this is not something that is strange. We talked about before in other books that the books that we have in Islam, they are transmitted to us through narration. And so you might find that sometimes a person might narrate this chapter before that chapter. He might narrate them out of order because every single individual book could be its own book. So even though the whole work, the Musannaf, which is 26 volumes, 36 volumes, right? 26 volumes. Although all of that is what we in the West would say a book, it's more of a compilation, that which a literary work. And that literary work has multiple books in it. And those multiple books have chapters or abwab. So kitab, tahara, bab, yani fi insan yakhruj min duburihi ad-dud. Right? Chapter regarding a person who has worms that exit from his anus. And so when it came to transmitting these kitab, these kutub, these books, and these chapters, sometimes they might be out of order. And so that's nothing to be taken back by if you find that a different print has the chapters in a different order, or if the chaptering arrangement, the arranging of the chapters doesn't seem to be as smooth as one might expect. And this is, you see the exemplary nature of a book like Sahih Bukhari, for example, or Sunan Abi Dawood, where the chapters are in a clever arrangement that provides a type of education in and of itself. If one were to just study the chapter titles of a book like Sahih Bukhari, for example, they would obtain a level of fiqh just in those chapter titles. But in any case, here, after talking about how to make wudu and some of the various actions in making wudu, the author now is talking about some of the things that do or don't nullify wudu. But we see that there's no real strong connection between this chapter and the previous chapter. So if the previous chapter was whoever washes their mouth and their nose from one handful of water, then this chapter, the author, he says, Bab fi insan yakhruju min duburihi dud. This chapter is regarding a person who has worms that exit out of his anus. I.e., if an individual has a sickness or some type of infection that causes worms, like a tapeworm or something other than that, to exit out of his anus, does this nullify his wudu or not? Does this nullify his wudu or not? And the basis of this issue is, when we talk about the madhahib and how they approach things, is the thing that nullifies one's wudu that which comes out, or is the thing that nullifies the wudu that which came out, or that or where it came out? Is the orifice the exiting of something out of those orifices, out of the anus, out of the penis, out of the vaginal hole? Are those anything coming out? Is that what nullifies wudu, or is it more about what comes out? And so, if something, for example, if an individual were to urinate out of his stomach, does that nullify his wudu? Whereas if an individual had a worm come out of his throat or his nose or his ear, and this, inshallah, would not nullify their wudu. But if it comes out of the makhrajain, in Arabic they call it, the 2 points of exit, either private parts, then does this nullify wudu or not? Because normally a bug or a worm or an insect, if it gets inside and burrows inside and then comes back out, then that's not something that came from the fecal matter, the urine, and things of this nature. And so because of this, scholars have disagreed. Is the issue what comes out? So no matter where pee or urine comes out from, then it nullifies the wudu? Or is the issue where it comes out from? So no matter what comes out from the penis or the vaginal or the anus, then these things nullify wudu, even if it's a rock or a bug or something of that nature. The Sheikh Ash-Shithri, hafidhahullah ta'ala, he says, وقال مالك خروج الدود من الدبر لا ينقض الوضوء وقال الجمهور ينتقض به الوضوء وقولهم أرجح. He says that Malik, he has the view that worms exiting out of one's anus does not nullify one's wudu, whereas the majority of the 4 schools of thought, they hold the view that the wudu is nullified, i.e., if something like this, these worms come out of one's anus. And Sheikh Ash-Shithri, hafidhahullah ta'ala, he says their view is the more predominant or the more preponderant. It is the stronger view. Now, let's see what the author brings in this regard from narrations. He says, حدثنا حفص بن غياث عن ابن جريج عن عطاء أنه قال يتوضأ إذا خرجت من دبره الدودة. He says that Hafs ibn Ghiyath narrated to us on the authority of Ibn Jurayj, on the authority of Ata. He said that an individual makes wudu if a worm exits from his anus. If a worm exits from his anus, then the individual should make wudu. He says, حدثنا أبو معاوية عن الأعمش عن إبراهيم أنه قال ليس عليه الوضوء. He says that Abu Muawiyah, he narrated to us on the authority of Al-A'mash, on the authority of Ibrahim, who said that this individual does not have an obligation of making wudu. Laysa alayhi al-wudu. He has no obligation to make wudu. And like we say, these 2 views are the epitome of the difference. So they say if something that is pure and clean and not from the things that nullify one's wudu normally, if they come out of the penis or the vagina or the anus, then these things don't nullify the wudu. This is the view of those similar to the view of An-Nakhai, and this was the view adopted by Malik. Whereas in the majority hold the view that was adopted by Ata, where that these things, if they come out, if you pass a kidney stone or something like this, then it nullifies your wudu. And like that is worms exiting out of one's anus. Now, they say حدثنا حفص بن غياث عن عمرو عن الحسن قال إذا خرج من دبر الإنسان الدود أو الدودة فعليه الوضوء. He says that Hafs ibn Ghiyath narrated to us on the authority of Amr, on the authority of Al-Hasan, who said that if worms or a worm comes out of the anus of an individual, then upon that individual is the making of a wudu. Then upon that individual is to make a wudu. He says, حدثنا وكيع عن أبي خلدة عن أبي العالية قال ما خرج من النصف الأعلى فليس عليه فيه وضوء وما خرج من النصف الأسفل فعليه الوضوء. Here, Abu al-Aliya from the Tabi'een, he gives a qa'idah. And this qa'idah, remember we talked about this before, I believe, in these recordings. If not, then somewhere else. Like Ibn Abbas, for example, gives the qa'idah, wudu is from what comes out, not from what goes in. Or should we say iftar is from what goes in, not from what comes out, right? These type of principles, the Salaf, they were existent during their time. These type of qawa'id, or these maxims, these principles, were in existence during the time of the Salaf. And it was the later generations that compiled them and extracted them from other texts and sources to make a complete science out of it. And so here, Abu al-Aliya, he is giving us a principle that he sees to be the judgment in this matter. He says, whatever exits from the upper half, i.e. of the individual's body, then there is no wudu because of it. The upper half, i.e. from the waist above. Whatever comes out from the waist or above, then there is no wudu because of it. And whatever exits from the lower half, then upon this individual is wudu. Whatever comes from the waist on down, then upon this individual is wudu. And although this is a clever wordage or a nice sentiment, from the things that can be noticed is that the principles sometimes earlier on lacked the preciseness necessary, or should we say desired by the later generations. So this principle for here mentioned by Abu al-Aliya, wudu is from whatever comes from the upper half of the body, then there's no wudu in it. And whatever comes from the lower half, then there is wudu because of it. If an individual were to take it at its face value and its apparentness, then the blood that comes from the upper portion of the body, there's no wudu, but the blood that comes from the lower portion. Or if an individual gets a cut in his stomach and he urinates out of his stomach, or he has a catheter or something like that placed in his stomach, and urine and fecal matter come out of it, then there's no wudu. But if it comes out of his leg, for example, then yes, there's wudu. And we see that this doesn't have the preciseness that might be desired by the later generations. But if an individual understands, they might be able to say regarding this statement of Abu al-Aliya that he's talking about specific things. Like, for example, vomit. There's no wudu because of vomit. There's no wudu because of ru'af, because of a nosebleed. There's no wudu because of al-qalas, that in the mouth vomit. There's no wudu because of tears. There's no wudu because of earwax that falls out on its own or something like this, right? He's talking about those things that are normal to happen from the upper half of the body, not those stranger or exceptional situations. Whereas that which comes from the lower half of the body, which normal from down there is urine, fecal matter, pre-cum, post-cum, semen, and anything else that might come out of those two places of exit, those 2 points of exit, the anus and the, I guess, what is it, the urethra or the urinary tract in English. And so one shouldn't look at this principle and say that he's saying whatever comes, even though that's what the words say. So he says whatever comes from the upper half of the body, i.e. normally speaking, then there's no wudu because of it. And whatever comes out of the lower half of the body, then there's wudu because of it. Then upon the individual is that he makes a wudu because of it. فَعَلَيْهِ yani wajib. Then it is necessary upon him to make a wudu because of it. And like we said, this is something that's important to understand, how these principles, they're not necessarily meant to be the way we look at principles, where they're all inclusive and qawaid kulliya or aghlabiyya. They're just saying a phrase based on the normality. And so nobody should take this statement and say, well, Abu al-Aliya said that there's no wudu on an individual if he urinates out of his stomach, for example, if he has a wound. He's talking about what's normal, and Allah knows best. And it's important to kind of have that understanding when reading the statements of the Salaf. They weren't as they weren't known for this ta'annut and this takalluf, this pig-headedness and this excessive burdening in their statements and things like that. that the later generations might have been known for. Naam, he says, حدثنا أبو قتيبة and Shu'bah and Hammad قال يتوضأ. He says that Abu Qutaybah narrated to us on the authority of Shu'bah, on the authority of Hammad, who said the individual makes wudu. He should make wudu. He said, حدثنا غندر and Shu'bah and Mansur and Musa bin Abdullah bin Yazid قال سألت إبراهيم قلت يخرج من دبر الدود أتوضأ منه قال لا. He says that Gundar narrated to us on the authority of Shu'bah, on the authority of Mansur, on the authority of Musa ibn Abdullah ibn Yazid, who said, I asked Ibrahim. Yani Musa ibn Abdullah ibn Yazid said, I asked Ibrahim, and Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. He said, I said, I have worms that exit from my anus. Do I need to make wudu because of them? He said, Ibrahim said, no, you do not. So this is the difference of opinion of the scholars in this issue. And like we said, the main issue circles around is the main nullifier, that which comes out, the excrement itself, or is the main nullifier the place that the excrement comes out of. So no matter what comes out of those places, then it nullifies wudu. And that's an issue for, or discussion for, another location. Now, the next chapter, he says, في الرجل يتوضأ يبدأ برجليه قبل يديه. Right, we see here he goes now back to mentioning how to make wudu. And so that last chapter, it seems like it was out of place. But he says here regarding, this chapter is regarding an individual making wudu. He should begin with his, and so he begins with his feet before his hands. And this is the issue of, is wudu necessary to be done in order? For example, us, the Hanabila, the view of the madhab is that from the prerequisites of wudu is that it be done, from the arkan of wudu is that it be done, murattaban, is that it be done in order. So you have to start with your face and then your arms and then wipe your head and then wash your feet. All of it has to be done in order and in close proximity time-wise. This is the Hanbali madhab. But is that something that is necessary or not? What if an individual to make his wudu and start with his feet first, and then wash his hands, and then wash his face, and then wipe over his head? What did the Salaf say about something like that? We've seen some narrations that have kind of indicated going out of order in certain things, taking the water from your beard, for example, to wipe over your head if you forgot, right? These type of things. But what about just blatantly starting with a different body part than the ones that Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned first in the Quran? So the author, he says, حدثنا معتمر بن سليمان and عوف عن عبد الله بن عمرو ابن هند قال قال علي ما أبالي إذا أتممت وضوئي بأي أعضاء بدأت. Now, he says, from the things that are strange here is that the Sheikh al-Shithri, hafidhullah ta'ala, he doesn't mention any of the statements of the madhahib regarding this issue. So this would be something to go back in and maybe add the statements of the four madhahib in this issue, because that is something that the Sheikh al-Shithri, hafidhullah ta'ala, normally does. But he doesn't do this in this topic. And there are varying opinions about this from the four madhahib. Anyway, Abdullah ibn Muhammad Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, he says that Mu'tamir ibn Sulaiman narrated to us on the authority of Auf, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn Hind, who said that Ali, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, it doesn't matter to me as long as I complete my wudu, whichever body part I began with. It doesn't matter to me which body part I begin with, as long as I complete my wudu. So this is the statement of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he didn't see it necessary for an individual to go in order in wudu. He says, Ma ubali, it doesn't matter to me. I don't care. If as long as I complete my wudu, either atmamtu wudu'i, I don't care which limb I started with. It doesn't matter to me. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, he says, حدثنا حفص ibn حدثنا حفص عن إسماعيل ibn Abi Khalid and Ziyad. قال علي ما أبالي لو بدأت بالشمال قبل اليمين إذا توضأت. طيب, the last narration, and this is an important topic. This is an important issue. The last narration was general. He said, it doesn't matter to me as long as I complete my wudu, whichever limb I begin with. And so the apparent meaning of this narration is he doesn't care if he begins with his arms or his feet. Why do we say the apparent meaning, the zahir? Because there's another possible meaning. And those people who say that you have to go in order, that is how they interpret the opinion of Ali. So they say, no, when he says it doesn't matter to me which limb I begin with, i.e., it doesn't matter to me, do I begin with the right side or the left side? And we all know that that is not something that is necessary, that you begin with the right side when making wudu of those limbs that have two. So if you wash your left hand or your left arm before your right arm or your right arm before your left arm, fala haraj. There's no harm in that as far as your wudu being accepted. But the previous narration that we've already translated, it seems that Ali is talking about the limb itself. Do I wash my foot first before my arm? I don't care. But in this current narration, where Abu Bakr, he says that Hafs narrated to us on the authority of Ismail, on the Ismail ibn Abi Khalid, on the authority of Ziyad, who said that Ali said, I don't care if I begin with my my left before my right when making wudu. So, is the previous statement of Ali to be understood in this light? Should we combine the two of them and say that what he meant in the previous narration is, it doesn't matter, do I begin with my right or my left, whichever limb I begin with of the right or the left? Or do we leave the statement of Ali in the previous statement to be general and to be all-inclusive to it doesn't matter which limb at all? Do I begin with my feet or my arms? And like this, you see why the scholars might still disagree. Because this can be an issue that can cause problems for somebody at times. They can say, well, why is there a disagreement when there's a clear statement in this? And this is the reality, is that this statement is not clear. It can be taken either way. And so this is why it is dangerous for the student, especially the inexperienced student, to kind of force an opinion on someone else, especially without understanding all of the intricacies and the details of the issues. And this is why there's a difference between a mujtahid and a tabi' and a muqallid, right? The different levels of understanding and scholarship and ability with the text. Because a person might think that he read this narration and understood it. It doesn't matter which limb I start with. But the reality of it is that this could be understood in multiple different ways. And so before you tell somebody an answer, you have to have some either capability to deduce that answer, or you have to have somebody that you're directly relying on who has done the deduction for you, and you are just simply transmitting their statement because you believe it to be the stronger of the evidences, or because you're blindly following and you don't know. And so you just transmit the statement of one that you can rely on. And this is something that a lot of us often we get away from when it comes to talking about the religion. We go outside of our abilities and above our levels and start issuing fatwa when we're not qualified. And it's as if because we read a narration or two, we think we understand it, let alone the one who reads the narration in English and thinks that he understands it and thinks that he can now go and tell people how to do things and what they can and can't do. And this is why the more you become in a relationship with knowledge, the more you'll realize that you don't have as close of a relationship with it as you thought. And it's something that takes time and it's something that takes effort. And you start to appreciate the actions of the students of knowledge. We're talking about those, mutamakkinin, those high students of knowledge, those who have dedicated 15, 10, 20 years in their studies. And likewise, you start to evaluate and value the level of the scholar much, much higher, because this is the individual who has come across these issues and researched these issues and developed his deduction abilities in these issues. And so this is just an example of it here. The first narration on Ali from Abdullah bin Amr bin Hind, where Ali said, I don't care as long as I complete my wudu, whichever limb I begin with. While the second narration from Ziyad says that Ali said, I don't care when I begin with, if I begin with my left or before my right, I don't care if I were to begin with my left before my right when I make wudu. So which of the two meanings is the statement of Ali? Abu Bakr rahimahullah, and you see that that's why he brings both of these statements, because he could be implying that, okay, this is how you need to understand the statement. Let's look at the third narration he mentions in this chapter. He says, حدثنا حفص عن ابن جريج عن سليمان بن موسى عن مجاهد قال عبد الله لا بأس أن تبدأ برجليك قبل يديك في الوضوء الحمد لله. Right? This statement becomes much more clearer. The statement of Abdullah ibn Abbas. He says that Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, he says that Hafs narrated to us on Ibn Jurayj, on the authority of Ibn Jurayj, on the authority of Sulaiman ibn Musa, on the authority of Mujahid ibn Jabr, the companion, the tabi'i, who was a student of Ibn Abbas and others. Mujahid said that Abdullah, and here when we say Abdullah, what is apparent is that it is Abdullah ibn Abbas, even though often when you see Abdullah just mentioned, it is usually Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. But you would have to go back and see, did Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, did he teach? Was he from the teachers of Mujahid? And so you take a quick second and you look, because right here it just says Abdullah. And so you go to Mujahid and you see, did he narrate on Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? And he's not known for that. Mujahid ibn Jabr. And this is an example of when you would go to Tahdhib al-Kamal over Tahdhib al-Tahdhib, right? Because we talked about in Tahdhib al-Tahdhib that Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, his goal is to just present the more predominant and the more noble and senior scholars of an individual. While Al-Mizzi, rahimahullah ta'ala, in Tahdhib al-Kamal, his goal was to try to gather up as many of them as he could. And so when you go to Tahdhib al-Kamal and you look up Mujahid, and it tells you the people that he narrated from, right? He says, with Jabir ibn Abdullah, we scroll down to where we get to the Abdullah section. Abdullah, he narrated from Abdullah ibn Sa'ib, and Abdullah ibn Sakhbara, and Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Abdullah ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Dhubab al-Dawsi, and Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, and Abdul Rahman ibn Safwan, right? And so they don't mention Ibn Mas'ud being from his teachers. And if we look and we see when was Mujahid born, another way you can kind of make this deduction is that you can see that Mujahid, he died in the year 101, 2, 3, or 4, somewhere in that range, 104 at the latest, and he was 83 years old. So let's just say he died in, he was born in 100, he died in 103, and he was 83 years old. He would have been 20 is when he would have been born, somewhere in the early 20s. And so it's unlikely that he would have caught Ibn Mas'ud, because if you know Ibn Mas'ud, for example, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he died in the 30s. I believe he died 32. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud ibn Ghafil, he died in the year 32. And so here, these are techniques and skills that you develop, and the more you do that legwork, the more you are constantly asking, because we gave a principle early on that when you see the name Abdullah, it means Abdullah bin Mas'ud most of the time, because he was the more senior. But it's not always the case. And here Mujahid, It's just saying Abdullah said. So you want to default that it's probably Abdullah ibn Abbas. Could it be Abdullah ibn Umar? Could it be other than him? It's potentially possible just looking at this narration. But who is Mujahid known for narrating on? Abdullah ibn Abbas. And so here, this Ibham, this individual who is not Ibham, this individual who is Muhmal, who is unidentified or unspecified, which Abdullah is it? Our default wants to go to it being Abdullah ibn Abbas, because this is who Mujahid was known for narrating. And at the end of the day, whatever Abdullah it is, then from what is known in a quick glimpse of looking at his teachers named Abdullah, they were Sahaba. So it doesn't necessarily matter. But here, Mujahid, he says that Abdullah, yani Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said that there is no harm if an individual, there's no harm for you to begin with your legs before your arms when making wudu. There is no harm with you beginning with your legs before your arms when making wudu. Now, so if this narration is connected and authentic, even though there's questions about it, then this would be a strong proof for those who say it is not necessary. And when you add to that the narration of Ali, you see now that no, perhaps Ali's narration about which limb doesn't have to do specifically with the right or the left side, but more about the arm versus the foot or the leg. And like this, we've completed that chapter, the chapter of an individual who begins with his legs before his hands or before his arms. And so these are just things that you can put in your quiver of information. Remember, once again, we'll say in closing, our goal here in this barnamij, Al-Musannaf, this program regarding the knowledge of the Salaf, it's not to give you a fatwa or an answer to a question that you need to do, but it's more so about broadening your horizon about what the Salaf actually said and did. Because a lot of times that information can be strange to us while we are the Salafi. And so it's necessary that we know that information. And a lot of times, some of the things that we might criticize in a person, or we might look at a person cross-eyed because of, or side-eyed because of, is things that are actually from the Salaf. And so it's important to familiarize ourselves with their views, whether we adopt them or not. As far as how you should practice at this stage and at your stage in learning, then it depends on who you are. If you're a beginning student, then practice based on what your teacher, who is teaching you the fundamentals, is teaching you, right? If you're going through Hanbali fiqh, Hanafi fiqh, Maliki fiqh, Shafi'i fiqh, then you like this, you develop your basis. And your teacher, he will guide you to some of the things that are, incorrect from the particular madhab that you're studying, so be it, and so forth. If you're studying without a madhab and you're just taking directly from the fatwa of the contemporary scholars like Uthaymeen and Bin Baz and Albani and Sheikh Fawzan, etc., then if that's what you're doing for your personal worship, then continue to do that, right? These are the scholars of our times and the present times before us. But this is to be a resource, especially for the English-speaking student, of just becoming familiar with what the Salaf said regarding these various topics. So we'll stop at that amount. Next time, we'll pick up with the chapter regarding the statement of the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, fi tahrik al-khatim fil wudu. Do you have to move your ring when making wudu? If you're wearing a ring, do you have to move it around so that the water can get under it? And what is the sunnah regarding that? Is it necessary to take the ring off, or can you just move it up a little bit and then move it back a little bit, or circle it around your finger so that the water can penetrate under there? Or if the water penetrates under it, is it necessary to move at all? So that's what we'll come to next time. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah, with Allah's permission, we'll try to do Sharh Usul I'tiqadi Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah tonight, so that we can get back on schedule. We missed Al-Awsat last week, And so we'll try to get picked up on schedule with all of those readings, inshallah. We ask Allah to make this something sincerely for his face. And we ask Allah to give us success to complete it, and that he put it in the scales of our good deeds, that we have something to leave behind, because indeed death is approaching for us all, and there's no escaping it. And the only thing that will matter is what an individual sent forth for tomorrow. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Can you read hadith without wudu? I don't know of anything that makes wudu necessary for reading hadith, except that an individual, let's prefer that individual لا يداوم على الوضوء إلا مؤمن. Nobody maintains their state of purification except a believer. So it's preferable that an individual maintain his wudu in all circumstances, right? You never know. But is it necessary to have wudu to read the hadith? Then I don't know this to be the case. And as far as the Quran, then that is a different conversation. And the disagreement therein is well known. But I don't know of anything that makes it necessary, or anybody who even stipulates it as an issue as it relates to hadith, except the general preferability that this is religion. This is religion. وَالطُّهُورُ شَطْرُ الْإِيمَانِ. Purification is half of iman. And so if an individual can maintain his wudu and stay in a state of wudu, then this is good. And Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, he would make wudu before going to class, before teaching. He would make wudu because he's about to talk about the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You would find from the Salaf those individuals who would make wudu before mentioning these statements, and they would value the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and honor it, and wouldn't treat it like the statement of anybody else, because as Allah says, وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ, he doesn't speak on desire. And even if that is referring to the Quran, then it is also about his sunnah. أَلَا إِنِّي أُوتِيتُ الْقُرْآنَ وَمِثْلَهُ مَعَهُ. Naam. Allah knows best. Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.